Romanesque and Gothic architecture are two important styles during the Middle Ages. Generally, they are quite different since Romanesque buildings are heavy and dark with round arches, while Gothic buildings are often taller, brighter, and have pointed arches. To give you an overview, the most famous Romanesque architecture are Pisa Cathedral, or actually its tower, Leaning Tower of Pisa, and Speyer Cathedral. For Gothic side, notable examples are Notre-Dame de Paris and Cologne Cathedral. However, some of the early Gothic buildings were renovated or expanded from Romanesque buildings. Examples include Château Cathedral, Noyon Cathedral, and Rouen Cathedral in France, and also Canterbury Cathedral and Durham Cathedral in England, or even as seen in this picture, Marriage of the Virgin painting by Robert Compong from around the year 1420 to 1430. So, even though the styles look different, they do share some connections and similarities. But before we get into that, let's start from the history. Romanesque architecture was established first in the late 10th century, but it particularly flourished in the 11th and 12th centuries. Meanwhile, Gothic is a style developed afterwards and was particularly common from the mid 12th century to the 16th century. One reason Romanesque architecture began to develop was because of a rise in pilgrimages, and with more people traveling for religious reasons, there was a need for places where the pilgrimages could rest, and it could be none other than churches. And the reason why these churches were influenced so much by Roman architecture, hence Romanesque, could be traced back to the year 800 when Charlemagne was crowned Emperor of the Romans. And fun fact, the coronation day was actually on Christmas Day. Charlemagne wanted to bring back the great aspects of ancient Rome, and of course, architecture included. One major example is the Aachen Cathedral, consecrated in the year 805, which was first built in the Carolingian and Romanesque styles, with the choir built later in the Gothic style. On the Gothic history side, the Basilica of Saint-Denis in France is widely noted as the first Gothic architecture. It was rebuilt starting in 1140 and completed in 1144 under the supervision of Abbe Suger. Similar to Romanesque, this was also built as a pilgrimage site. One of the reasons why Abbe Suger didn't just use the Romanesque style on this place was that Suger believed in Pseudo Dionysius, who saw light as a symbol of the divine. So Romanesque architecture, which is quite dim and dark, wouldn't do it for him. I guess history can already be counted as one difference, but let's see other differences between the two styles, especially in terms of characteristics. The most noticeable difference between Romanesque and Gothic is the general look. Romanesque architecture look grounded and solid, while Gothic are taller and lighter. You can also note this difference from the arches. Romanesque typically uses round arches like how the Romans did, and Gothic uses pointed arches to distribute the weight. Both styles use vaults. Vaults are arch structures that form a ceiling or roof, but Romanesque architecture would generally use barrel or groin vaults, while rib vaults and fan vaults are more common for Gothic. Flying buttresses are a defining feature of Gothic architecture. They are used to support tall walls and large windows by redirecting structural weight outward. On the contrary, Romanesque buildings rarely use flying buttresses. Even if they did, they were buttresses, not flying buttresses. The difference between buttresses and flying buttresses is that buttresses are attached directly to the wall, but flying buttresses are detached from the building and connected with an arch. An example of Romanesque architecture with buttresses is the Basilica of Sainte Marie Madeleine in France. Similarly, Romanesque architecture has thick walls and thick columns to support the buildings, while Gothic architecture can feature thinner walls and slimmer columns because of flying buttresses and other support elements mentioned earlier. Romanesque architecture features few small windows, like the Church of St. Philibert in Tournai. Some of them also have splayed windows to let in more light. In contrast, Gothic architecture is known for its large window to allow light into the interior. One feature that is very well known for Gothic architecture is the stained glass. While it is more common in the Gothic style, stained glass has been used by other regions and styles way before Gothic, even in Romanesque, like the Prophet's window in Augsburg Cathedral in the year 1065.
If stained glass is an iconic feature of Gothic, then domes are one prominent feature of Romanesque. Not every Romanesque structure has a dome, but it is typically at the crossing of the nave and transept, meaning at the intersection of a cross-shaped plan.
In terms of decorations, Romanesque is often characterized by geometric patterns and carved motifs, especially around arches and doorways. Meanwhile, Gothic architecture is often decorated with nature motifs and intricate designs. And the main difference is that in the flamboyant Gothic period from the mid 14th century, decorations are basically everywhere, unlike Romanesque, which don't decorate everywhere like that. If you're curious about the influences of each architectural style, Romanesque was mostly inspired by Roman, of course, Carolingian, Ottonian, Byzantine, and other local styles. For Gothic, it's mostly Romanesque, Islamic, Byzantine, and possibly Armenian. Despite their differences, Romanesque and Gothic architecture have their similarities. The first one is that both of them typically follow the Latin cross plan. This layout features a long nave, a transept crossing it, and an apse at the end. Not all cathedrals follow this feature, but it is very common for both styles. Another shared feature is the west facing entrance, or the west entrance to be more simple. In both Romanesque and Gothic architecture, the main entrance is usually on the west side and is often decorated with detailed sculpted tympanums above the doorway. The next similarity is the use of arcades, which are rows of arches supported by columns or piers. However, even though both of them use a lot of arcades, each style still keeps its own distinct look, which means Romanesque architecture would still use round arches, while Gothic architecture features pointed arches. A well-known example of Romanesque arcades can be seen in the famous Pisa Cathedral and its tower. The last main similarity is actually not very prominent, as it is not a similarity in terms of appearance, but more about its history. If you have watched my video about Gothic architecture, or actually, you know what, you don't even really need to have watched my video. Or if you have read or researched about Gothic architecture in general, you would know that the term Gothic architecture was coined by Giorgio Vasari in the 16th century, the Renaissance period. Vasari named the architecture style Gothic after the people responsible for Rome's downfall, as the people in the Renaissance were basically crazy about Greek and Roman art. A similar thing happened with the Romanesque, as the term was named later, not by the people who created the style. The term Romanesque was most likely coined by, you know what, I don't even know how to pronounce his name, but Charles de Gerville, a French archaeologist in the 19th century. If you are curious about how they called this architecture before the term was coined, there were actually no specific terms for the Romanesque style back then, but Gothic used to be called Opus Francicanum, or Frankish work, or sometimes Opus Modernum and Novum Opus, translating to modern work and new work respectively. And those are the differences and similarities between Romanesque and Gothic. Before I ask what I'm about to ask, I know that Gothic is more popular. Also, the Google Trend says, and most of my viewers love Gothic things anyway. But I can't tell but feel curious about which is your favorite, Romanesque or Gothic, and why. Or you can just tell us about your favorite cathedral or any structure in general. Like, my recent favorite is Worms Cathedral in Germany, which is a Romanesque cathedral but later had Gothic pointed arches and Gothic style rib vaults built in. Also, if there is any other architecture style you want me to compare with the Gothic one like this, please comment it down. That's it for today. Thank you for watching. I hope you have an amazing day. See you on the next journey.
Actually, I forgot to record this outro part, so I'm saying random things right now so that this part won't be too quiet. Alright, this should be enough. Peace out.